Hello everyone, here we are, Module 5, and this week we are looking at a spaghetti western film called A Fistful of Dollars. This is a 1964 film directed by Sergio Leone, and the music is by Ennio Morricone. I apologize for butchering those names, I'm not Italian, but I think it's important to bring up both of those names because the soundtrack to these movies was... is one of the more memorable things from them. So they're considered classic soundtracks, some of the best of all time. So I wanted to bring his name up as well early on. So this genre was around from the early 1960s, about 61, 62, and then it made it all the way till about 1978 or so. That's about when those films were made. This film, again, was a 1964 film, so it's right kind of at the beginning of it. And A Fistful of Dollars is actually part of a trilogy of films called the Dollar Trilogy. There is A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and then The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Again, it was most popular in the mid-60s. That's when it kind of became into popularity, starting with this film right here. And Spaghetti Western is actually kind of a nickname. Western Italiana. Again, don't speak Italian. Italian-style westerns. That's kind of the classic name, the name of the genre of film. A spaghetti western was kind of a nickname or kind of derogatory name, actually, given to the genre by film critics who thought it was kind of a cheesy style of filmmaking. But they ended up gaining popularity and being box office successes, even though the critics didn't like them. The reason why they're called spaghetti westerns or Italian westerns is because they're mostly directed by Italian directors. They were collaborations between, there's a lot of heavy collaboration between Italy and Spain, actually, on a lot of spaghetti westerns. A lot of American actors are in the film. The lead actor in our film is Clint Eastwood, American actor. And there were some other European countries as well that actually collaborated with Italy in making these movies. Okay? So that's kind of about the genre. One of the things that's also very a big part of the genre is it's known as the anti-hero protagonist, right? So a lot of the films we've been watching, we have kind of the classic hero, right? So if you look at Slumdog Millionaire, he's a classic hero. He's got good morals and he's trying to do good and he's trying to, accomplish his goal, right? The anti-hero came about in this time frame. I would say our protagonist in Breathless is actually an anti-hero, although even a little more so in the sense that really he didn't really have any redeeming qualities at all. The anti-hero often lacks morals and might do heroic acts, but it's usually self-serving, right? That's why they're doing it. And you'll see a lot of that in this film, although he does do some stuff that is just kind in the end, but again, most of what he's doing is just trying to get ahead and make money. Usually these are low-budget films. In them you have deplorable villains, desert landscapes, non-traditional music scores, and a lot of violence. That's the other things that kind of you'll find in spaghetti western films, okay, or Italian-style westerns. You see all of those things, and that's what they were known for. The landscapes is actually like an additional character in the film in most of these films. Again, they are low-budget films. You usually see this when the characters are shot, that there really isn't blood coming off of them when they were shot. That's because it's a budgetary concern. You can also look at the special effects makeup on Clint Eastwood, like later in the movie towards the end, and you'll see that the makeup job's pretty bad because low budget. And also when we go look at clips, you're going to see that they use something called day for night photography, and we'll talk about that, and that had to do with budgetary concerns. My understanding is the budget for this film was about $200,000, which is pretty low. Next, we're moving on to talk about Sergio Leone himself. He was the director. He's often credited as the creator of the spaghetti western or Italian-style western because all his films that he directed 2 trilogies in this Italian western style, and they're the most famous westerns in this category. Okay, again, he did the Dollar Trilogy, which is A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And then he did the Once Upon a Time series, which is Once Upon a Time in America, Once Upon a Time in the West, and then there's another one in there, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's 3 of them in that series as well. Sergio Leone was known for juxtapositioning, so putting side by side, juxtapositioning, extreme close-ups next to long shots. So that's one of the things you'll see in the style of this particular movie is you'll see really, really tight close-ups cut right next to extreme long shots. And that's, again, something that isn't traditionally done, but it became a thing in the Italian Western. The other thing about Sergio Leone is he had a lot of other credits. He directed these films, but he also worked as a second unit director. He was a writer, a producer, and also worked as a script supervisor, which is the person who is on set with the script and is making sure all the lines are being said and the continuity is correct. Again, I talked about this already a little bit. Directed the Dollar Trilogy and the Once Upon a Time in the West, Once Upon a Time in America. And then there's a third one in there, and the name is escaping me. It's got some kind of odd name like Duck You Sucker or something like that. And it's part of the trilogy that's in there with Once Upon a Time in the West, and then there's the Duck You Sucker, and then Once Upon a Time in America. And he actually turned down the directing gig for The Godfather to direct Once Upon a Time in America, which is also kind of a gangster film. The narrative in this particular movie, stuff to talk about with it, is it's an unauthorized remake of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. Okay, so Akira Kurosawa is a Japanese filmmaker. We actually watched one of his films next module. And this is basically a remake of it, set in Western civilization, right, as opposed to a Japanese kind of period piece. So one of the contextual pages, or on the contextual page, you'll see a video that kind of shows you the comparisons. To the point where they were sued by Kurosawa and awarded all the money made in the Japanese release. And also, if you look on IMDb, you would actually see Kurosawa and some of his cohorts credited as writers on IMDb of A Fistful of Dollars, because the story was really, really close. Here you can see a couple of the shots. Like, those are like shots that almost replicate shots from Yojimbo. Okay, so that's how closely they followed it to some degree, is you'll even see replicated shots that are meant to look very similar. The basic plot structure is revealed with a man with no name, and he wanders into a town that's under siege by these two rival gangs, and he decides to take advantage of the situation to make some money. So when he goes into the town, his whole goal is just to get rich off playing both these groups against each other. So that's kind of the plot line. When he walks into the town, the whole kind of story, the very beginning of the film, when he's riding into town, the whole kind of plot structure is revealed right there in the opening sequence. There's a bell ringer, a guy that like rings the bell at the tower every time somebody dies, and he catches up to the Clint Eastwood character, the man with no name. And one of the things he says is, you'll make a lot of money in this town or you'll die. And that's basically the plot structure of the movie right off there in the one of the first lines in the movie. The man with no name is a pretty complex character. Most of the characters in the films are bad and self-serving. The idea here, though, would be to look for a character with some moral compass, right? There is a character or two that has a moral compass, and they're there to kind of shine that light for us. So look for those characters. But the man with no name is an incredibly complex character. He's very resourceful and intelligent. And he has an unusual amount of like gun skills, right? Like almost like superhuman gun skills, so fast. They're usually drifters and they're loners, and that's kind of what you find in Italian style westerns all the way through. It's always this loner drifter type that has really good gun skills. And have very complex characters in general. And these films right here made Clint Eastwood's career. They like gave him his start as a big time movie star. The other thing that you find in A Fistful of Dollars is no happy ending, right? Most spaghetti westerns and the narratives in general in these Italian films, these Italian westerns, there is no happy ending at all, okay? And this film, it won't be any different. Talking about cinematography, it was shot in a format called Technoscope. Now, the reason why it was done this was to save money. So basically, if you look at a piece of 35 millimeter film, there's little holes on the sides, right? And 4 holes equals 1 frame of film. Okay. And to save money, they shot on this new format that was introduced in 1960 again called Technoscope. And they shot on 2 perfs, not so 2 holes, not 4 holes. And so they were only using half the amount of film, which helped them save film. But then they had to kind of blow the film up a little bit to make it fit the widescreen aspect that they wanted to show it in. So it made the films a little bit grainy. And so that grainy look became part of the signature of the look of Italian-style Westerns. Extreme close-ups with relevant content in the background, that's very big, right? He uses the whole frame when he's photographing shots, a lot of the shots. He'll stick something way close to the foreground, but then there's always stuff in the background that continue to tell the story, okay? There's a great handheld POV. They use zooms, tilts, and pans, and even in tight shots. So usually you won't see the camera move a lot when the shots are really tight shot, but in this genre, they do that. There's a great shot we're going to look at where a guy is cocking back a rifle, and then we whip pan up to his face. Great shot. It's a tight shot, and it's a whip pan. They also use day for night photography. So day for night is when it's during the day, but it's meant to be at night. So there's a filter called a monochromatic filter that you would put on the camera or over the lens. And you had to have the sun in a certain position to make it work. And they would shoot stuff for nighttime, but it was during the day. And they would do that because they just didn't have the power and the lights to like shoot at night. And so they would have to save money and do it that way. So I'll show you a clip of that stuff as well. Again, very good at using the entire frame. A lot of the clips I'm going to show you near the end, there's about 2 minutes of clips. They're using the whole frame every single time. Okay. Again, it was made on a $200,000 budget, and it grossed about $14.5 million. So it was a very successful box office success, although it wasn't critically acclaimed. This is just an example of that Technoscope. So that top film, Lawrence of Arabia, that was shot true anamorphic, and you can see the frame's a little bit bigger, and it's pretty clean. And then the one down below is the Fistful of Dollars, which is the Technoscope. And you can see the frame's a little bit smaller, so they definitely had to expand and kind of zoom in on it, which is what gave it that kind of grainy look to it. But they're both very wide frames. Even in that shot, you can see how they put something in the foreground, kind of a close-up of Clint Eastwood there, and then there's the 3 guys in the background. So again, each frame, they are filling the frame with necessary information to help tell the story. Acting performances. Okay, so the man with no name, who's our title character, he's very subtle and understated. And it's probably by design. Like, he's very calm under pressure and just doesn't make a lot of just big movements, and he's just very calculated, right? But everyone else is probably a little bit melodramatic. Like, they overact just kind of a little bit. And so see if you can kind of catch on to that. That Clint Eastwood's character is very subtle, and everybody else is kind of a little, especially the bad guys, the 2 gangs. Those gangs, the bad guys or whatever, they kind of overact it up and play it up a little bit. The film editing. The shot selection for each cut is carefully made to inform us. Okay, so when you're talking about editing of this film, they were very calculated about the shots that they chose and how they put them in what order, right? Definitely trying to tell the story visually and create kind of a new style of telling stories. When we look at this, talking about spatial relationship, a lot of these shots look like this. Like, you'll see this where it's like, again, 2 people on the edge of the frame with him in the center, which kind of sets up a little triangle there. That is to kind of give us the spatial relationship of what's going on in the scene. So if they're choosing shots that look like that, they're always giving us a good idea about who's in the game and what's going on in this particular moment. So that's one of the shot examples of that. Okay. Emotions on faces. They use very tight close-ups. And they choose them at the right time to kind of show us what's going on. This is a close-up from a sequence where he comes up to these 3 bad guys, these 3 gang guys, and he's kind of joking with them. And at this particular moment, he has this look on his face, and it lets them know that he's serious about what he's talking about. And the close-up helps kind of tell that story. Okay? And the next thing is what's important in the frame. So in this shot, we'll look at a clip that kind of looks like this as well. The gun is really large in the frame, and it's kind of sticking out through the frame. And the reason why they're choosing a shot composed like this is because They definitely want to play up the fact that the man with no name, Clint Eastwood's character, is really good with a gun. He's got superhuman gun skills. He's super good at it. And so they always make sure that they show us kind of his weapon, even though they're not showing him. So they're really trying to inform us as to what's important and what to pay attention to in each shot by the different shot selections. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward thing. You do see some of that style where you see extreme close-ups next to really big long shots, and that's kind of the style of this genre as well. Talking about the composer. Before we get to sound design, I wanted to talk a little bit about the composer. Morricone was a classmate of Sergio Leone, right? So they grew up in school together, and that's how they kind of formed this director-composer relationship. And it's considered one of the greatest relationships of all time, one of the greatest cinema relationships of all time, the fact that these two work together. Morricone has 528 composer credits. Insane amount of composer credits, right? Did a lot of work. He died just this last, or like a year or two ago, July 2020. So he was working all the way up till the end as well. His music, his scores were probably the most recognizable element of these films. When you go watch it, you'll see, okay? He composed the Dollar Trilogy, all three of them. Again, so that's a fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And then he also composed all three films in the Once Upon a Time trilogy. And then he also composed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is the Quentin Tarantino film that came out just a few years ago. He was the composer in that film as well. And that whole story, that whole film is kind of just paying homage to this style of filmmaking, although it's made with more modern techniques. All the other things I wanted to say about Morricone is that his soundtrack for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is regarded as one of the most recognizable and influential soundtracks in history. So that's a classic soundtrack. When I hear it, I know what it's from. And actually, from most of these films, these Dollar Trilogy films, if I hear the soundtrack, I know which movie it's from without even seeing an image, because they're so memorable. That's one of the things that I wanted to point out. They definitely used untraditional sound and instruments in the soundtrack and the sound design of these films, right? And the reason why they did that was out of necessity. Because they're so low budget, Morricone didn't have access to a full orchestra to compose a traditional score for the movie. So they would use creative elements and add to the soundtrack in unique ways. So some of the things that they would use in the music would be gunshot sounds, cracking whip sounds, whistling, which I think you'll hear whistling in the soundtrack of this film, voices, like singing and kind of harmonizing, trumpets, and electric guitars. So those would be some of the things that you would hear in the soundtrack and in the sound design of this particular movie. The other thing that's big in this particular film, or something that I wanted to point out, is that the sound effects punctuate and comically kind of tweak the action going on, right? So they over exaggerate the sound effects in this movie, like the gunshots, there's like ricochet sounds, and it's really like big sounds. When somebody slaps somebody, it's extremely loud. Just all the sound effects that they use, they're kind of over exaggerated, and that's part of the genre and the style that they chose to do these films in. Again, also trying to kind of make up for the fact that they just had a very small budget in general. The dialogue was dubbed in 3 different languages usually for these films: English, Italian, and Spanish. And you had actors who came from all over the world. So it's actually not actually known what like the original language is. But you'll see when you watch it, it kind of feels kind of dubbed in later. Like they shot the film and then they put the sound in after the fact of the dialogue and everything. That's something that's pretty standard for these films, and again, it's partially because it was a low budget movie, so they didn't have good sound equipment on set, so they weren't able to capture quality sound, and they had to dub it in later. So there's some spots in there where you'll kind of see, kind of feels like they're putting in the words after the fact, so take a look for that. Now we're going to look at some film clips. So first up, we're going to see a shot where we are going to reveal the man with no name. There you go, right there. There he is off in the distance. So it's a pretty interesting shot. They use that a lot. This is a good walk up, and then we go back to the man with no name. This next deal is also a reveal. So we're going to reveal his head tilt. This is also a classic shot. There's the head tilt right there. And then this shot coming up is a great shot where they're using the whole frame, which is a very interesting framing that he uses. Here we're going to see a zoom, which gets used often in the film. Very, very seldom do you see zooms. That was one of them. Here, there's another extreme close-up, and here's another tilt-up. Whip pan kind of tilt-up. And there's another extreme close-up. So this just gives you a sense of what the style of the movie is. Here, this is day for night photography. So it's daytime, and they're putting a filter on the camera because they didn't have enough lights to shoot at night. And so they're making it kind of look like night here for us. So that's what they had to do on this film. This is one of the kind of duplicated shots from Yojimbo, the Akira Kurosawa film right there. And here's another example of them using the whole frame, which is very good camera work, using the whole frame. There's another one of the zooms that this film is kind of known for and the style's known for. And then we're going to see the quick action zooming and the quick cutting of the firing, and then the gun in the heavy foreground using the whole frame again. Those are just part of the technique. There's another zoom again right there. So again, these are all parts of the style of spaghetti western. These extreme close-ups are also part of it as well. You see a lot of those. And then another thing that's interesting that you're going to see come up here in a second is this handheld POV shot, which is very unique for filmmaking. It wasn't something that was done much back then, and so you can see it. They go to it twice. There it is again right there. And this is again something that's unique. So all that stuff they're using, the zooms, the handheld, the whip panning, those are all techniques that are unique to the filmmaking process for the spaghetti western at the time, and it added to the style of what these films were all about. Okay, and that kind of was the appeal of the style as well. So I hope you enjoyed those clips. Now you can go check out the film and get through the rest of the pages. Take care. We'll talk soon.